I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome everyone to our interview of Luis Loza, developer at Paizo, who's worked on a whole bunch of cool stuff. Luis, welcome. Yeah, welcome Luis and Luis's cat to this show.
What's your cat's name, Luis?
Name's Nova.
Nova.
All right,
Aww.
welcome Luis and Nova. You're a one Nova GM, even if you haven't GM for Starfighter Society 10 times.
Yep.
All right. So, Luis, why don't we get started by, would you like to tell us how you got into being a developer at Paizo? What was your path?
Oh.
I know you mentioned a ton of APs to us recently that you and your group had run.
Do you want to know my freelance kind of path, the start of that, or the whole Pathfinder?
Let's start with your path into RPGs in general, and then how you got into freelancing as well. Please, Luis, tell us your life story. We're here for you.
Only as it relates to RPGs.
Well, when I was a young boy, I grew up playing a lot of video games and whatnot, which I think a lot of us have done so. But I didn't really start dabbling into anything resembling RPGs until I started reading Choose Your Own Adventure books, which I would say are like my first foray into that. My first proper foray into an RPG, though, would actually have been right when I was around 12, when I somehow stumbled upon the, I think, GURPS 3rd edition rulebook.
Oh, man.
Which has a little, one-player choose-your-own-adventure bit at the back of the book where you break into a nice mansion and are just stealing stuff, and I think it has you roll some dice here and there to see how well you do. After that, though, I first played RPGs with other people in high school. One day, a couple of friends of mine said, "Hey, do you want to come play Dungeons & Dragons?" And I said yes, because I've been seeing that they've been playing for a while and I wanted to join in. So I skipped track practice to go play D&D for the first time and made my first character a halfling rogue, and had been playing ever since. And in fact, one of the players from that group, one of my friends from back home, is still a player in some of my campaigns today.
Wow.
Something awesome. Which is pretty amazing. Since then, we played D&D for a while until everyone ran off to college and left me behind. And then we went to college and 4th edition came out. We played that for a while. And after no one was any longer living in the dorms and it was a lot harder to get together, we eventually moved in with each other. And at that point, we're like, oh, let's try something else. And I happened to have seen this picture online that had the cover art from Rise of the Rune Lords Part 2, which has the ghouls coming out of the well with the wrapped up body, and the Foxglove Manor's in the background. And all it just said is, Foxglove Manor, the scariest night you'll ever have in D&D. And I was super intrigued, and that's when I learned about what Pathfinder was. I said, hey, we could try out this new Pathfinder game, which is right around when the new rules were coming out. And from there, we just kind of ran with it and have played through so many APs. I've run so many APs at that point. I was telling you that I think we've successfully gotten through 7 APs, either with me running or me playing in them, which is a lot.
Yeah, that is. It's
probably the most in the office.
Yeah,
but
and
not sure, but probably.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of failed launches of APs and whatnot. Plenty of modules that we played and stuff like that. Surprisingly little organized play. Just Nebraska, or at least where I was in Lincoln, didn't really have much of a scene that I was aware of at the time. And soon enough, around 2013, there was a contest with the Adventure Week Games. They were having this, it was called the Pathmaster contest, where the basic idea is pitch them a module, and if they like it, they will select their favorite ideas and have the writers, the people who pitched those, write those modules, and then once all 5 modules are out, they will put them out to the public, and the one that sells the best and people like most ends up getting their own mini AP to write for themselves. So I entered that in, and I got in with a module that was basically Groundhog Day, but contained within a single fort called the Timeless Fort. And I didn't win, but that's fine. I still got paid for it, surprisingly. And after that, I just, hey, what else can I do? And soon enough started bugging Wes Schneider on Twitter to the point where he, I think, eventually relented and was like, okay, fine, here, hey, how about writing these spells for the Giant Hunter's Handbook, which is my first player companion work. And I guess I did well enough that I got hired on again and again and again and again. And soon enough, I had, 4 years of freelancing under my belt directly for Paizo. And 2 years ago, when the call was put out, hey, we need a new developer, I applied and I got the job. And now here I am, your fellow coworker.
Yay!
There was much rejoicing.
So we mentioned there about how you've played and GM'd a bunch of APs. What's been your favorite AP from the perspective of both player or GM?
Well, I've only played in one AP, so I guess it would default to, hey, Kingmaker was pretty great. I sure had a lot of fun with that, and I actually did. It was a real blast. It was me as a Cavalier, and then the other 3 players. There was a Barbarian, a Paladin, and a Wizard. So really what it became is the Wizard strategizes everything and figures out a way to create walls and teleport us around to just, get all of the enemies. We are his ultimate weapon, and he's just the coordinator and moving us all around. The one I think I liked running most was Hell's Rebels, which is one that actually wrapped up right before I moved out here to start the job. But I don't know, the intrigue and the whole being contained within one city is just a blast, and my players really had a great time with it, and it was fun to just run with whatever ideas they had. The whole rebellion aspect of it makes for a lot of creativity.
But you've also written adventure paths, and people are going to get a chance to see some of your writing coming up soon.
That's his real favorite adventure path volume.
So can you tell us about your work on adventure paths as an author?
Yes, I actually have a lot of credits in adventure paths, but the first credit for writing an adventure path is actually coming out this month. It's Tyrant's Grasp Part 5. It's called Born by the Sun's Grace. And I was lucky enough that Crystal, who at the time was the developer putting it together, is like, hey, do you want to write something in Arcadia? And I immediately leaped at the opportunity, and I had to do it. So I got to write an adventure that takes place entirely in Arcadia, and I basically am the first big look at the continent. And even though the adventure itself takes place in a single nation within the whole continent, it's still more information that we've ever given out on the continent up to this point.
Yeah, because there's not very much that's about Arcadia that's gotten out there. It's pretty much just Distant Realms?
Distant Shores.
Distant Shores, thank you. One of those
Shores.
Distant Shores.
Realms is on a plane.
Yes, that's right. Distant Shores has that one section, but other than that, we pretty much haven't said much. And you've really been stepping up as a champion for showing more about Arcadia.
I've been lucky that Adam Daigle has decided to let me also play along with the Arcadia stuff, because he was the one that wrote the Sagata entry in Distant Shores, but he also wrote his deity Kazutal into Face of Galarian, which was another kind of big look that we had at Arcadia. But yeah, up until then, that was about it, except for the occasional drop of hey, Arcadia's a thing here and there.
It's one of those things where at least from the perspective of Pathfinder Society scenarios and stuff, you can kind of get into the situation where it's, oh, this is this cool area, we want to write about it, but there isn't really much that's been said about it, so we don't know what we're going to give to the author to build off of. So it's really something that benefits a lot from having someone who's experienced and is passionate and has sort of the background research and understanding of sort of the cultural influences that are going into the region to take the helm on that.
Yep, that makes sense. All right. So we talked a little bit about your adventure path that you wrote as a freelancer, Luis. But let's take a little bit of a look into your time as a developer at Paizo. So, what was your very first product when you got to Paizo? They were like, Luis, I'm sure we've got something easy for you. It won't be the Construct Builder's Handbook, right?
I think technically I was given the Construct Builder's Handbook and the Blood of the Ancients player companion at the same time.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Oh,
That's the
geez,
Paizo
yeah.
way.
So Blood of the Ancients was, yeah, I mean, that was a player companion that was mid development at the time, and you got a chance to, I think, pretty much develop everything that got turned in. I didn't get to assign the book or outline or anything like that, but after that it was mine, and then 2 weeks later Eleanor's to tackle. But yeah, Construct Builder's Handbook though was very much like a, hey, here's the thing, deal with it.
Well,
Take the can we've been kicking down the road for the last few months. Here,
well,
you can fix
it
it,
wasn't
right?
just
Welcome.
that. It wasn't just that.
No, I
Some
know
of the
it wasn't
stuff
just that.
was done. The problem was there were some archetypes, and they looked at them and they sent them to me, even though I was working on PF2. And it's like, Mark, do you have enough time to at least do an assessment on these, because they looks like there's some weird stuff. And I basically wrote back with, I read them all. I was like, concerns, with like big exclamation mark and lines under it, and then wrote what some of the concerns were. It's like, yeah, this is gonna be a major thing. And so they're like, hey, new guy, Luis, you can do this and your other stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, with your notes and from what I could see of the archetypes that were already there, I could tell like what the nuggets of the ideas were. That like, oh yeah, these are obviously some core good ideas that we can build off of, and then trim them down and redevelop them, rebuild them. That's obviously our job as developers to do that exact thing. And then there wasn't enough words left at that point to fill the entire space, but it did take a little bit of extra.
But you got to write your own construct archetype, though, right?
Yeah, I got to write some construct archetypes in there. I got to add in some extra magic items and flesh things out. And I luckily didn't have to develop any of the construct stat blocks themselves, because then that would have been weird. For I also wrote for that book. I wrote.
Yeah.
That's like the last thing I turned in before moving out here to start the job, and then immediately say, oh, okay, now go work on the book. It's like, well, at least Adam took care of all the stat blocks. He took the easy stuff, took care of all that, but it was kind of fun to like piece that book together from like figuring out how this all came to be and how it ended up to where it was here in the schedule and whatnot, and then kind of slowly push it through and eventually reach that point where I can say, hey, look, this book is ready to go to layout. And everyone is suddenly very excited that, oh, now it can be done.
Yeah.
Right? So from Blood of the Ancients through Chronicle of Legends, what was your favorite Pathfinder player companion that you worked on?
I would have to say that would be the Martial Arts Handbook. That is one that I have been wanting to see us do, or at least something akin to that, for a very long time. And the fact that I got to outline that and put that together with Eleanor and basically make the book that I was hoping that I could have had 2 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever was great.
Now you have it, just 2 to 5 years later.
Not only that, but just the various writers that were on it I'd ask, with our outlining process, we ask for, hey, can we get some feats or an archetype that does X, Y, Z, and leave that pretty bare bones unless we need something very specific. And seeing that every freelancer knocked it out of the park and just like gave us back more than what we expected. Like it was top quality, top notch, all the way through.
Why, yes, all of the freelancers on
Yes.
the Martial Arts Handbook were phenomenal.
Were you on Martial Arts Handbook?
Yes.
Excluding anything that Mark worked on for the moment, did you have any parts of what did you really like about how the book came together? Were there particular features in it that you liked, or ideas?
So one of these sections was all about expanding the combat maneuvers, rather than just say, oh, here's another feat that makes you do it even faster or give you an extra bonus, which we already have enough of those that it just, we can't really do those feats again. That would be redundant. We wanted to expand on what you can do with those. So Matt Morris, who was the author for that particular section, I just said, hey, give me more grapple feats, give me more trip feats, so on and so on. And then what he turned in was, over the top dramatic, lifting dudes up, spinning them over your head, tossing them 20 feet aside and whatnot, and just really ridiculous, exciting, fun stuff that just seemed really fun to play with, and I loved it from the second I started reading it.
Awesome. Yeah, and that really, some of those player companions, like Martial Arts Handbook, has a lot of, somewhere in there, of like what also became the Pathfinder 2nd edition philosophy for feats of like, it should help you do a cool new thing you couldn't do before, not just give you some enormous bonus on stuff. And definitely there was a lot of that in Martial Arts Handbook.
Yeah, that's actually a thing I've been trying to push, both through the products that we were putting out, and as a freelancer, it was just exploring interesting design niches that haven't been carved out yet. Because even though the game is close to 11 years old at this point, I still think there's a lot that can be done with it. So that's a particular thing we had in mind with Chronicle of Legends, for example, where we wanted to take something like the Cavalier, and we can find new design spaces within the Cavalier by saying something like, oh, well, he has a banner. Why aren't there more banners? Just come up with new banners. Or, hey, here's a new super category of traits and stuff like that. Just intentionally making new design space that's more interesting beyond just bonuses. I think it's very easy to do if you know what you're looking for.
Yep. Awesome. All right, so now for something that I'm sure a lot of our listeners tuned in for. So, as some of you are no doubt aware, Luis, as part of the Luis and Eleanor team that he's mentioned before, has moved on from the player companions and onto being the development leads for the World Guideline in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So let's talk a little bit about that, because at this point, 3 of those books have been announced, but really information is only out there about the first 2, and we're not going to spoil tons of stuff about the third one before it's due. But we could talk a little bit about World Guide 1 and World Guide 2 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about Lost Omens World Guide. What was the what are some highlights that people can expect?
Sure. Well, so the first 3 books in the World Guideline that we so brilliantly title, codename World Guide 1, World Guide 2, World Guide 3, we wanted to really cover all of the, I think, overall basics for the campaign setting that people have grown accustomed to, and we have been able to expand and fill out over 10 years worth of material, partially because there will be a lot of new players with the 2nd edition rules, and they need to be brought up to speed, but also because it helps cover a lot of concepts and ideas and that a lot of people have grown used to already with their characters. We don't want to shut them out and have them wait for 5-6 years before they can worship their particular deity that they like. So Lost Omens World Guide, and then World Guide 2, Lost Omens Character Guide, and Lost Omens Gods and Magic. In my mind, I always saw them as our equivalent to the Inner Sea World Guide, to Inner Sea Races, and Inner Sea Gods, which are 3 big hardcover campaign setting books. So we wanted to get those taken care of as soon as possible. So with World Guide 1 being the equivalent to the Inner Sea World Guide, of course we want to see, hey, where are you from? Where are you going? What's this world like? And some of the cool things we got to do here, because of the nature of the product, it's a bit smaller than the original Inner Sea World Guide. We had to kind of compartmentalize things and make it easier to digest. So instead of just saying, okay, first let's look at Absalom, now let's look at Cheliax, now let's look at Belkson, and just go down the list of every single nation, it can be kind of hard to digest all of that. We broke it down, as you may have seen on our blogs and whatnot, into the 10 meta regions of things like the Saga lands, which covers Irison and the lands of the Linor Kings and the realm of the Mammoth Lords and Berisia, all of that stuff that is just amazing, big, high fantasy stories of like more folk stories and things like that. And then we have Old Cheliax, which is just everything that Cheliax has been touching in the last 100 years and how they've influenced things. And keeping those themes together, I think, has been very useful and will make it very easy for someone to look up, hey, I'm here in this part of the world. It'll be a lot easier to look at the map. Oh, that's the Shining Kingdoms. Hop over to the Shining Kingdoms and learn what you need, as opposed to having to flip through the entire book and find.
So what's your favorite one of the 10 meta regions?
I think of the 10, I would probably say that my favorite is the Golden Road.
Okay, so this week's.
Yeah, this week's in particular. I just have a particular affinity to Katapesh in particular because it was the first AP that I ran for Pathfinder, and then had run it.
Fire.
Yeah, Legacy of Fire, and then run it a second time, in fact, all the way through. So I really like the area. I just think it's more interesting than the typical fantasy fare that you're used to with, knights in shining armor and things like that. Not to say that stuff doesn't have its place. It's just, hey, something I've been seeing for so many years. This is something different. It's more interesting to me. It suddenly catches your eye, and just seeing new cultures, new monsters represented beyond the typical fare of trolls and orcs and the like.
Very cool. What can you tell us about the living monolith that's been spoiled as being the archetype on there? I heard it was by top people.
Top men. So the living monolith is great in that it's now the third iteration of the living monolith. We had the prestige class in 3.5, and then it got rebooted in Pathfinder, so why not bring it back again? The fun thing about that is it has a lot more story hooks tied into it, I feel, than some of the other archetypes. If you recall the living monolith, it has ties to something called a cost stone in the original iterations of that. And in the archetype, it has an option for you to gain the cost stone again, but that is super rare beyond even just like becoming a living monolith. And that is a whole adventure hook in and of itself to go acquire a cost stone and get that set up. And I also think it's just pretty fun because it's really the tough guy kind of archetype. It makes it really hard to kill you once you have progressed quite a bit in the archetype, to the point where if you fail your dying check but don't critically fail, it just doesn't make you more. It doesn't progress your dying anymore. It's really hard to kill you at that point.
They have to literally focus on you on the ground if they want you dead.
Yeah.
That is super cool. And so Lost Omens World Guide has the 10 regions. It's got a few backgrounds. Do you remember any backgrounds you liked from the Golden Road?
I like the. Let me think. I mean, the Syrianologist is always something I always liked, and it's dabbling into. Hey, there's all these great pyramids and ruins and stuff all throughout Assyria. Let's go check them out. Is always just the perfect hook for a player to join into any adventuring party.
Makes sense.
And the associated lore of ancient Assyrian actually covers quite a bit. It's actually, I'm guessing, if you were to think about it, one of our more powerful lore skills at that point, because if you're in the right campaign, that covers so much more than something just than compared to like warfare lore or something like that.
So Arcane pointed out, it's sort of a question about, was it intentional, the idea that since Golan is a kitchen sink setting, that if picking the meta regions very carefully based on story themes would allow people to focus their story and realize that like the mana wastes and all of its mutants and guns might not really factor into a story about killing Linorms in the land of the Linorm Kings as much. It gives you a signpost about which areas fit together more as a story? Was that part of it at all?
Yeah.
Or was it more of a jigsaw puzzle with the map?
It's a bit of both. I mean, the map is it happens to have broken up into 10 nice little regions, but yeah, recognizing what the themes of each meta region are really helps both GMs and players quickly focus on what kind of campaign they want to be part of. So if you see that, oh hey, here's the Eye of Dread, and it's overrun with undead. Hey, suddenly I can just say we want to play there as a player, or it can say as a GM, hey, we're going to go play here, and you can immediately start getting ideas of what the themes would be appropriate for your characters and for adventures and whatnot, and make it a lot easier to run a game without having to take the time to read, okay, here's Ustalav, okay, and now here's Last Wall or the Gravelands now, and figuring them out piece by piece. If you can just work from there and then zoom in as much as you like for your given campaign.
So easy to learn, but still with a lot of depth, which follows
Yes.
along the Pathfinder 2nd Edition tagline.
Exactly.
All right, so I think that really covers a lot of stuff from World Guide 1. But what about not the World Guide, but the Lost Omens character guide? Now, you said before that it's sort of like Inner Sea Races. Does that mean that, like Inner Sea Races, it's like 80 to 90% lore, or around 80% lore, 20% rules?
No, it's quite a bit more rules this time around. So, unlike Inner Sea Races, where we cover pretty much every race that we had talked about at that point in the game, and give them their context within Galarian and give them their deep dives. This time around, we want you to understand who you are a lot better right out the gate. So we take the core ancestries and then give them their deep dives of lore, like, hey, here's dwarves, here's the way dwarven culture has spread around Galarian, under Galarian, over Galarian, and get to know, how would I dress, what kind of traditions would I have, things like that. And then, because we are being so very kind, we give you lots of fun things to play with, new ancestry feats and things like that, new heritages for where it makes sense, or even new ancestries altogether if those core 6 don't really scratch that itch for you.
So is this somewhat more like some of the player companions that were specifically focused on, like, Dwarves of Galarian, Elves of Galarian, Halflings of Galarian, in terms of, like, how much content people can expect to see for these core ancestries, with each of them getting a real focus in this book?
Yeah, I would say that is closer to more what you could expect than let's say, the Inner Sea Races, where if you read the Dwarf section, all it gave you was lore and then gave you all the mechanics at the back. This is more a mix of half and half for each of them, and then it expands on that here and there where it makes sense. But it also is a big thing that we wanted to do with that book, and specifically I wanted to do with that book because that was actually originally my pitch for that product, is to give cultures and ethnicities to some of the other ancestries that existed. Humans, it's very easy to just say, oh, I'm Taldan, I'm Brissy, and I'm Grundi. You have all these options already to work with. And then you can say, I'm a dwarf. And there's not anything beyond, I'm a dwarf. You can say, I live here, I live there, but it didn't really mean much beyond. Sometimes it's, oh, I'm an out dwarf, I'm a Ponnet dwarf. But then you get to something like halfling, and you are just a halfling. There's no breakdown on that. So we wanted to give each of those ancestries a bit of an expansion to better to make it, first and foremost, make more sense. There wouldn't just be one monolithic ancestry. They spread around all over Galarian.
So let's go through the core ancestries other than human. What's your favorite new dwarf culture? Not a rule, not a feat, just new dwarf culture.
So I think my favorite is that of the underground dwarves, which is one of the major distinctions we make. So when the dwarves completed the quest for Sky, some of these dwarves said, okay, we did it, let's go back home. There's no reason to stay up here. That was it. All we needed to do was see the sky and then come back. And these are the underground dwarves that decided to stay back in their homes instead of go up onto the surface. And they are very beholden to tradition, and their way of life is actually significantly different because they don't have a sun, they don't have a sky, they don't have to deal with a day and night every day, and instead their lives are more centered around the forge. And,
how long is a forge day?
Yeah, they have the concept of a forge day rather than dedicating it to a 24-hour day-night cycle. It's, hey, we get up, we run the forges for 20 hours, and then we go to sleep for 12 hours. So a forge day is 32 hours for a dwarf, and that's the way they keep track of time, rather than saying every 24 hours till the sun went down and came back up. It's, hey, the forge was hot, and then we did our work, and then we came back, and then it's time to start the forge again. That's a whole new day.
It's really funny with all Linda smiling and nodding. We have on this interview probably, like, if we just brought in Eleanor, we'd have, like, the 4 top experts on underground dwarves here, because Linda also wrote her Adventure Path volume. So...
Speaking of Adventure Path volumes,
that's right.
That was part of Age of Asses, which Luis is also writing for.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
I'm writing the finale. That is the first time that anyone will get to play high-level second edition material.
Get to write 20th level encounters for second edition characters.
Right, 20th level encounters and be the precedent that is set for the rest of the game's life. So no pressure.
So
you can do it, Luis. We believe in you.
It sounds like people in chat are really excited about the ideas that you mentioned, Luis, about the additional cultures and especially the underground dwarves. But they really want to know what's the deal with underground dwarves and the Dwargar, who also sort of stayed down and were like, we're not going to do the quest for Sky, and also Droskar, and also evil.
Well, so the original quest for Sky came from Torag, who is a lawful good deity, and very much hey, I want to uplift these people and move them on to bigger and better things. And even though the underground dwarves decided we're going to go back home, we did it. That doesn't mean they suddenly are. At worst, they're curmudgeons. They're not straight up evil, but the Duergar, who are worshiping evil dwarven deities, are still a problem to the underground dwarves. They still clash, just like anyone would expect with any other previous dwarf stories. An underground dwarf probably covers most of the same things, but they just might have different traditions, might dress a little differently. One particular aspect of underground dwarves is their women grow beards, which is not something that you commonly see on something like the surface dwarves that you're used to seeing. So it's for the most part the same dwarf, but it has those nice little tweaks that make them distinct enough that you might find them more interesting than, let's say, the surface dwarves or the other main ones, which are the mountain dwarves.
What about the gnome cultures? Because gnomes seem like they're pretty haphazard. Like, how do you determine what's your favorite gnome culture in this book?
So gnomes are really interesting. Gnomes being technically aliens, much like the elves. They're from an entirely different plane originally. The way they develop is a lot different compared to something like a human or a dwarf. Instead of if you hang around a long time in the deserts, you become acclimated to the desert. No, instead the way they work is they are fonts of, they draw upon fonts of energy and magic to help them develop. So if you are a gnome and as a child you happen to hang around an arcane ley line, for example, you will develop differently than your cousin down the road who wasn't near that ley line and instead just had the typical Fey development that you're used to seeing in our normal or typical gnomes. So each of the 4 different magical traditions are one of the equivalent to an ethnicity for the gnomes. We have something like the Keen Spark gnome, which is tied to divine magic, as opposed to the Fel gnome, which is tied to occult magic, for example.
So, just like how the sorcerer can be interacting with all these different magical traditions and infused with magical traditions, gnomes have this magical spark within them that can connect to each of these fonts as well.
Yes, exactly.
If I recall correctly, Jason revealed the in no direction the heritage that allows that many of these ethnicities will take, the one that says that you can get a different type of magic than primal for your gnome.
Yeah.
Because these things that Luis is talking about are non-mechanical, they're cultures. So if you are a fel gnome, it doesn't mean you have to take the heritage that lets you have occult magic, but it tends to mean that you gravitate towards it, if I remember right. All right, so before we move on to the new ancestries that I bet people want to hear about, give me one rules element from the non-new, from the previous ancestries that you kind of like, or that you really like.
So one that I like is this is a human ancestry feat that is tied to Taldor. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be Taldane to take it, but they happen to be the ones that take it more often. I guess I would say is the way to properly express that. They have access to it, but it basically is the whole keeping the stiff upper lip, proper, prim and proper nobility kind of idea. Where if you take damage, you can, or if I believe it, if you take damage, I think
it's an emotion effect.
Okay,
Betraying once again that I also worked on this book, but
if you are subject to an emotion effect, and you can make a deception check to basically play it off as you don't sell it. You make it so it seem that it didn't affect you in any way whatsoever.
I'm not scared.
And it's I think the name of the feat is keeping up appearances or something along that line.
So then a rogue with Dread Striker wouldn't be able to catch me flat-footed, and a Will-O-Wisp wouldn't be able to feed on my fear and stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff like that.
It's like, oh no, I guess he's not afraid. Too bad. All right, awesome. So now for the moment that I'm sure a lot of people want to know, but except if they know you, they already know the answer, which is of the 3 new ancestries, the Hobgoblins, the Leshies, and the Lizard Folk, which is your favorite?
Well, I would definitely say Leshies, but Lizard Folk are a pretty close second.
Kate Baker is saying Leshy, so I feel like there's only one thing I can do.
Yeah, you do.
She said Leshy, so I've got to do 3 of the Leshy emoji.
Yeah, definitely a big fan of the Leshies. I was really excited to have that make it to the 3 accepted ancestries when we were trying to figure out what would make it into this book.
I feel like we're both up there in terms of the biggest Leshy fans.
Yeah. And since we have the author of the Leshy ancestry, the developer of the Leshy ancestry, and the designer of the rules elements of the Leshy ancestry on here, and we're still missing Eleanor, then we would have complete set. But let's go around. What is everybody's favorite part of the Leshy ancestry, starting with Luis?
The Gourd Leshy heritage is my favorite. That Gourd Leshies, their heads are hollow, so if need be, you can keep something like a potion up in your head and then retrieve it later, and it's a lot easier to access than something from like your backpack. So, and I also like to imagine that occasionally, they just kind of walk around with like bells or something in them, and they just kind of jingle around us.
All right, Linda.
Well, I answered this question as a part of our Leshy Garden episode, which was a requested episode that essentially had me talking about Leshies for 1 hour straight. But the general idea there being that I would say what it is the diversity of options that you have with heritages, because there's so much rich potential you can draw from, both from real world plants and the sort of characteristics that might be associated with them, in order to come up with like really fascinating and unusual powers, as well as the fact that the division between sort of ancestry feats and heritages allows for a natural division between the physical features of the Leshy and the plants that they're connected to, and the nature spirit that they embody, that they've been through all these years.
All right. Well, I should answer too, I guess, if I'm saying we're going to go around the horn. I really like the feat where the Leshy just grows really long vines to hold their weapons, and they get reach, but the damage goes down on their two-handed weapon, because it's got a great mental image. It's interesting. It's a way to use the 3-action economy, because you spend an action doing that, and it's just kind of silly. Night Fox points out if there's enough space in there, could they hold their familiar, like the cat in the head, for the Gourd Leshy. I can't remember. I think it says objects, but maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, GM's discretion.
Yes, that's what we'll say.
All right. So, Luis, though, you said Iruxi, the lizard folk, are close second. So what allows them to compete with the magnificent wonder of leshies that we all know and love already?
I just really like their flavor. They're really interesting. We didn't really have a chance to expand on them or we never took the time to expand on them during first edition much beyond like here they are. They hang out in swamps and they're something that you kill around 3rd to 6th level, and giving them more interesting grounding in the world is just really interesting to read. Patchen Mortimer was our freelancer for that, and he did a really great job talking about how because they're such a long-lived race, they've been around since before Earthfall, I believe. They just have grown to become very patient as just a culture and an ancestry. So, instead of another ancestry that's raring to go and kick down some doors and beat up some orcs, it just something that's more calm, collected, focuses on the astrological signs and uses that to help guide them and use that for their magic and things like that. It's just really interesting.
The stars say this too will pass.
So if you have a goblin and an Uruxi in the same party, you might get some really interesting dynamics going on there.
Oblivion Oath, check it out every Thursday. Because it has absolutely a goblin and an Uruxi in the same group.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
we're gonna have we've announced we're gonna have an Uruxi faction leader as well in Pathfinder Society. So it's really awesome to have that that well of information to draw from, and that really the fact that it was going to be in that book and hearing some of the starting information about that really inspired us to say, hey, you know what? We want to bring one of these into our stories as well, in a prominent role.
Well, it sounds like there's so much more lore and so much more rules for all these ancestries. But surely you couldn't have fit even more cool things in that book. It's all about the ancestries, right? I mean, that's what we said. You said it was like inner-sea races. Could there be a whole other section that's about organizations?
What an oddly pointed question, Mark.
It is like inner-sea races in that it covers a lot of the ancestries. But unlike inner-sea races, there's more to it than that. The book, essentially the tagline for the book is Ancestries and Allies. So not only are there several ancestries, there are different groups, as we mentioned at PaizoCon with their announcement. There are 5 different factions that you can join up with and be a member of that and get different options.
Did we announce all 5?
We announced a couple of them. We announced, I think we talked about the Hell Knights and the Pathfinder Society.
Okay.
As 2 of the 5 on there. I mean, as one of the development leads on the line, I guess it's up to me to decide if I want to talk about all 5 of them.
Yeah, right.
But some of those 2 are the real obvious ones, and some of them are actually brand new. For example, there's the Knights of Lastwall as one of the factions that you can join up, who are kind of like some of the knights that you're used to seeing around Lastwall, but because there's no Lastwall anymore, the things are a lot different, as opposed to just, hey, we're going to hang around and make sure that nothing happens with that lich hanging out underground.
Oh, bad news!
Oh no!
Bad news!
No. Well,
suddenly Tarbafon is doing some more stuff, and it's like, well, we can't keep vigil over him now. We have to go stop them, and we have to.
We literally can't keep vigil anymore.
And they suddenly the group has gone from just standing watch to actively going out and trying to put a stop to, undead forces that are walking around and put an end to this darn lich once and for all. And you can join up for that, righteous cause.
In case you missed that, Vigil is the capital of
It is the was the capital of
Lastwall.
So, I'm excited about the Knights of Lastwall, and here's a random fact, which is sometimes when these books, such as Character Guide, are going through their approvals, Eric Mona might walk by with a question, and he came up to me, I think yesterday or today, was like, Mark, did you take a look at these Knights of Lastwall? I was like, yes. Does that mean that Eric found this really insightful question or comment about things to change? He's like, I really like these Knights of Lastwall and some of the things that they're doing. I could really see, I think the fans are really going to like it. And a lot of that is some great work from the freelancer, Isabel Thorne, and from Luis and Eleanor in developing, and The Knights of Last Wall are, I think, something that I bet you guys here watching didn't necessarily have a character that was affiliated with the Knights of Azam or other groups like that before, but might be considering affiliating with now. So, Knights of Last Wall, Hell Knights, I guess everybody knows about them, and the Pathfinder Society. Is it going to be very similar to previous Hell Knight and Pathfinder Society stuff? Do we have our Hell Knight and our signifier and our orders in the Hell Knights?
Yeah, the Hell Knights, very much in theme with them, are still strictly by the book Hell Knights that you're used to seeing, where they have the two main now they're archetypes instead of being prestige classes. You can be a Hell Knight or a signifier if you're more inclined to magic, and then you can go by order. If you want to be a member of the Order of the Rack or the Gate or things like that. All of those main orders are represented here. Once again, for you to join up if you wanted to, and what's fun about the Hell Knight, the Hell Knights, and actually the Knights of Last Wall, is the way we can use existing material to build towards them already. We've already kind of previewed the Eye of Dread section. Its archetype in World Guide 1 is the Last Wall Sentry, and there actually was you, Mark, who mentioned that there's a Hell Knight Armiger in World Guide 1 as well, which are
no one was talking about last time's World Guide at the PaizoCon panel, so I had to reveal it.
Yeah. So with those archetypes, typically if you're used to seeing the archetypes from the playtest, you have to take a couple of feats within an archetype before you can spin off into something else. Those two are actually unique in that if you decide to become a Knight of Last Wall, we can have you use some of your... you don't have to spend all your feats first to get all the Last Wall Sentry stuff and then go into a Knight of Last Wall. You can go directly into a Knight of Last Wall if the story makes sense and you reach that point.
What if you're a Pathfinder Society agent and you want to take one of the archetypes from the Pathfinder Society section? Can they do that too?
Actually, I believe so. I don't recall, actually. It's been a while since
I think they can. But
there's a lot of, unlike what you're used to seeing maybe with first edition, where here's the player companion that's very isolated, all its options are within this book, and don't touch anything else. We want to make sure that it's more interesting for us if we can take something like a Hell Knight and say, hey, you were a Hell Knight Armiger. Now you can take the Hell Knight prestige class, or the Hell Knight archetype, and not have to worry about it not making sense that I have suddenly like two different archetypes. No, it of course makes sense that you would go from Armiger and then you pass the test and now you're a proper Hell Knight or you're a signifier now. So it's pretty fun to be able to build off of that and point back to previous books. So
if I recall correctly, you, me, and Eleanor, we were looking at a feat for the Bonuat that was in the character guide, and it pointed back to if you have a background that matches with the Bonuat in World Guide, then you get extra, or you could take it more easily or something like that.
Yeah, I think you have access for it if you have.
So Arcane had a question. Arcane was getting very excited about a Knights in Shining Armor group that you could really join up that might not just be like the Eagle Knights or associated with the country. I was wondering, are these organizations themselves an archetype, he asks, or do they instead have rules elements associated with them and they change the rarity and give you access to those elements? And is this on a need-to-know basis, he asks?
So the way things work here, so it's pretty easy for someone to, let's say, join up with the Pathfinder Society or the Knights of the Last Wall, because the Knights are taking whoever they can help that is willing to fight the good fight. So each of the organizations details how you could join the organization and the requirements for doing so. And once you join the organization or reach a specific ranking within the organization, each organization will tell you exactly when. It'll say, hey, now you have access to these options. So if here's a cool lance that the Knights of Last Wall use, normally that would be uncommon and really hard for you to acquire. But once you join up with the Knights of Last Wall, suddenly, hey, we have these lances. Here, you can have one, or you can buy one from us, or build one, or craft one yourself if need be. But now it's because you're part of the organization, you have access to what the organization entails. That can sometimes take a little bit more effort. For example, becoming a proper Hell Knight requires undergoing the Hell Knight test, and if you can't beat that double on your one-on-one combat, then maybe you're not fit to be a Hell Knight.
Yeah, that makes sense. So here's one thing though. This is only a 136-page book, and obviously there's 5 organizations. We've mentioned what 3 of them are so far. How, as a GM, how am I going to be able to have enough NPCs to fill out these organizations? Even if you had like a few from each organization in the back of the book, I think that it's just going to have to build them up. We used to have like a few books in first edition with some sample Hell Knights and sample character and a lot of sample characters for each one.
Yeah, so we had things like Inner Sea NPC Codex,
Right.
which would say, hey, here's 2 different Hell Knights. Here's a Hell Knight, here's a Hell Knight Signifer, and there's like each level 7 or whatever. But and we have a lot of that in this book. We will have 2 NPCs, which is more of a regular member and then a higher ranking member for each of the organizations. And that only covers 10 NPCs though, and
yeah, what if I need a squad of Hell Knights? They can't all be the lower guy headed by the one upper guy.
Yeah, probably not enough. So one thing that we did is we have these things called theme templates, which are very similar to the simple templates you're kind of used to seeing from first edition, or even the adjustment template from the playtest, like the elite or the weak features, where it lets you add on a few extra properties or abilities to any creature stat block and give it more of a flavor of a particular organization. So, for example, the Hell Knight theme template will, at lower levels, give you something like the Hell Knight armor, and later at higher levels you do extra damage, you do some fire damage and things like that. Or the Pathfinder Society one gives you a lot of lore and knowledge, and at higher levels will, I think, gives you like the ability to recall lore pretty easily. So it's something that you can slap on, and based on what level the creature is, will give you a number of abilities to give you the appropriate theme. So if you said, oh, here's a level 1 stat block that I wanted to use, I can throw on this theme template, and ideally suddenly it's become a Hell Knight stat block, or it's become a Pathfinder Society or a Knight of Last Wall. And we even cover some of the organizations that didn't make it into this book. So if you wanted a big army of the Whispering Way, they're here for you to throw the theme template on it and start running through your campaign right away.
That makes sense. And with the knowledge of generic NPCs in the Game Mastery Guide, you can combine those 2 and get ready pretty soon. Arcane said, talked about in the past, books could refer to the Pathfinder RPG line, but he's wondering if with the new reorganization of like having a designer, I guess me, on some of these books, and having people from every team there, plus consolidating into fewer books so it's not quite as many for people to have to reference, would the plan then be to be able to reference through more or perhaps even all of the books?
Yes, absolutely. That's part of the reason why we are referring back to things like the Hell Knight Armiger is, 1, because we can, and 2, to prove that, like, look, we're going to be doing this moving forward. One of the obstacles that we constantly face when developing campaign setting books or player companions were when that one particular option would actually be the perfect fit for, like, hey, this archetype gives you X spell, but that spell happens to be in a campaign setting book or a player companion. Suddenly we can't really point to that, and it's really tough to do so if we absolutely need to. So this time around, being that it's 2019 and it's a lot easier to access some of our rules content, like for example through Archives and Ethos, we can say, hey, this particular archetype grabs a spell from World Guide 1, for example, and it's a lot easier for someone to reference that nowadays than maybe it was when first edition first started rolling around. So we're not afraid to do that anymore, and I think it'll open up a lot more possibilities for us and make it easier to work with when the time comes.
So we can actually use all of our rules and our products.
That's always
Yes.
good. And you're talking about archetypes a few times. Now, with the way archetypes are made now, it seems to me like you could even expand archetypes that turn out to be more popular than expected, or were popular but just there wasn't enough space, with new feats and options just in a later book that are just flat out for that archetype. Is that something that you think we'll see in Lost Almond Characters Guide? Like, we've got the Knights of Last Wall and the Hell Knights and some of these organizations that are at Pathfinder Society that they have an archetype and everyone has already heard in the Lost Almonds World Guide. Will those starter archetypes from the World Guide get any support in the Character Guide?
Yes, absolutely. Going back to the Hell Knight Armiger, there are a lot more ideas that we had for the general Hell Knight concept that didn't absolutely require you to be a proper Hell Knight or a signifer, that we just said, hey, these particular Hell Knight feats, they're Armiger feats. You can take them if you're the Armiger, and that immediately gives you 3, 4, I forget how many, a handful more feats compared to what you had already with World Guide 1, and we do that again here and there. And we have plenty of chances to do so again later. I'd mentioned that we give you abilities based off the different Hell Knight orders, but those are just the main orders, the major orders in the setting. If we wanted to later then expand these to include the lesser orders, we can definitely do so at any point.
Go! All right.
And kind of point back and say, hey, this uses this particular option from World Guide 2. Go look that up if you need to know how that works.
Awesome. Well, it seems like a lot of people in chat are super excited about some of these possibilities. Sheppy T.S. Rodriguez said, man, PF2 is shaping up to be awesome. So, sounds like that your and Eleanor's vision for some of these things for the World Guide is really exciting, at least this cross-section of viewers.
Yeah.
As well as everyone else who helped on the World Guide. And one of the cool things about having someone from every team is we also have an editor from every team who takes a lead. And on World Guide 2, let me see, that was Lou Pellizzar, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we have so many different people's perspectives going in, and I think it's going to make the product really cool. All right.
I think so too.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Luis about any of this wide corpus of Luis-related topics that we've gone through so far today? So I think we've hit all the high points that I was really looking forward to asking about. I feel like it's a little far out now to talk about either your AP volume for Age of Ashes or World Guide 3.
Yeah, just a bit.
Probably at this point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It looks like nobody else has any other ones here about that. So if that being the case, then wait. Night Fox has a question. It's a very simple question. Hobgoblins?
They're here, and they're great. I mean, they're combat focused. I think they're going to be an ancestry that a lot of people like. Ron Lundeen, who wrote for the Iron Fang Invasion. I think he wrote for Iron Fang Invasion.
I don't remember, but he wrote for a lot of AP, so he probably did.
I can't keep track of it.
So he took,
I'm actually playing Iron Fang, so I don't look at the volumes very much.
he for sure wrote the Eye of Dread section of World Guide 1, which included the new Hobgoblin Nation of Oprak. So he grew to know the Hobgoblins pretty well, and he's the one that tackled the Hobgoblin ancestry. And I think he did a great job, and it's just, I don't know, all three of these ancestries I think are going to be really popular, and I'm really looking forward to people making characters of those.
Awesome. So Arcane has a question for the room, for you, Luis, or any of the rest of us who want to answer. Is that given the design philosophy of PF2 is to give a lot of class feats for things that you might or might not want and only put the things that are really fundamental to the class's progression into the features, is there any worry that if you create an archetype and keep expanding it until it has a bunch of feats in it, that it will wind up looking too much like a class?
I don't think that would be a concern, because I mean, it's the classes. Your particular paraphrase of Arcane's question there, I think, sort of has the heart of it, that the things that are most crucial to the class in terms of what are their proficiencies and what are some of their core abilities that you expect them to always have are going to be there no matter what. And then so that wouldn't be part of the archetype regardless. Like an archetype isn't going to tell you, what are your starting proficiencies, what in your saves, what weapons do you have, and each class has its own niche still, I think.
And I also think that we are more likely to provide support for just a proper class than we are to do with a specific archetype. Essentially, you will see more fighter feats more often than you will see new Hell Knight feats down the line. So it even if something like the Hell Knight gets a lot of support, it won't keep up. It won't keep pace with anything that is a proper class. Even after just a few books, the World Guide 2 has some new fighter and champion feats there, so that's already giving them more than an archetype could ever expect to have.
And that makes sense to me. And to be fair, there are some class ideas like Cavalier that we tested out in the playtest, and you guys all pretty much universally said, hey, this makes a lot of sense to be an archetype, so everyone can have a horse and a banner. So it is true that the line is blurred and that some things that were classes in PF1 might be archetypes in PF2, but I agree with the L's here that I'm not too worried about anything we do pick to be a class. I think it's going to really shine and stand out from archetypes. So Alex Gudas is wondering how often we want to release more ancestries. I think we always want to release more ancestries. How often are we not wanting to release them?
I think we will be releasing ancestries whenever it makes sense. For example, if we did a book tomorrow on Arcadia, that would immediately be like, okay, well, we need to have a Werwood and Skinwalker ancestries in there, and Rougarou in there. And then if the next day after that we decide, we want to do Tianxia, then obviously we're going to throw in something like Kitsune and Nagaji and
Samsari. And all those.
So whenever we have a book where it makes sense, I think we will be sneaking in ancestries. Just because I don't foresee us... because there were so many ancestries in first edition, it's going to be a while before we can get something like an advanced race guide to cover a lot of them. So it'll be a lot faster for us to put one or two and pepper them in as we can than wait 2-3 years from now to get 50 of them all at once.
Although, when did Advanced Race Guide come out in Pathfinder First Edition's life cycle? Was that like the spring release in the third year? Something like that?
It looks like it was... Here, I have it here. June 2012. So that was 4 years in.
So that counts as the spring release,
even
though it's June. So is that the third or the fourth year?
That's 3 years in.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So spring of third year, I guess, right.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're going to... we've already shown with World Guide 2 that we're putting in more at a faster rate than... There have been more added at a faster rate than waiting until the spring release of the third year.
And I think another fun thing that we can do is, because we're not putting any ancestries in the bestiary, we are putting things that might be suitable as ancestries in the bestiary. You see the kobold in the bestiary, you might think, that would be great for a proper ancestry. You can tell us as fans, hey, we want this, this, and this from the bestiary, and then we can maybe find a spot for it sooner than later. And then you can use that as kind of your catalog to buy to pick out the ancestries that you think might be a good fit for later books.
And Alex says, "Write faster, gotta get my weird race fixed," by which we know he means Kitsune. But Kate says we're getting the Leshy. I'm good for a while. So
so you can probably expect ancestries pretty soon, actually.
But Alex, we're not going to be announcing more information about the release schedule.
So, and who knows, we might be able to sit more in after that in even future world guides, whenever it makes sense.
There may have been a meeting today in which ancestries were talked about at one point.
Perhaps, yes.
Perhaps. There might also not have been. All right, so related Arcane is thinking about ancestry feats vis-a-vis some of the ancestries that had super powerful abilities, would that be a way to balance the more powerful abilities of the more powerful ancestries, or would you expect to just give all of that stuff at the beginning, just to the more powerful ancestry and give a warning of like, hey, probably don't play this unless you're ready for the fact that it has more stuff.
Well, I'm
So
sure
like
one thing we could,
Strix and their
yeah.
flight was an example.
I'm sure one thing we could do is play around a little bit with the heritage mechanic of the game. So we might present a Strix that decided that the way their wings developed is such that they can't fly as easily, and that's represented by a particular heritage. And then later they can buy in with their ancestry feats, or there might be a heritage that says, say, you're good at gliding for now, but it's going to take a little bit and build up from there. It really remains to be seen. We also haven't really pushed the limits on the ancestries, like pushed against the wall just yet of where the boundaries are. So I'm sure we will start coming up with new ways to start presenting some of those mechanics later on.
But in general, I would think that we would favor coming up with options that allow them to be used in a more standard game as opposed to a game that then has to rebalance for high power and stuff.
With
like
flying archers, where anything that is melee for like 12 levels of play that doesn't have wings is just like, well, the Strix archer goes in and kills it, then we're here too.
We were here too. Yeah, you don't want that.
All right, very cool. Okay, so I think this is good for the interview.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for coming and sitting with us and answering our questions, Luis.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us, everyone, in the Arcane Bark community. So, bye, everybody. See you on Saturday or the next time on Arcane Bark.
Bye!
Bye.